26, City of Cupertino Planning Commission meeting. Let's do a roll call. I call this meeting to order, and let's do a roll call.
Oh, okay, thank you. Commissioner Capil?
Yeah.
Commissioner Takahashi?
Here.
Commissioner Fong?
Present.
Vice Chair Wong?
Present.
And Commissioner Saxena is absent today.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to the provisions of the Brown Act and a recent executive order issued by the governor to facilitate teleconferencing to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission at public meetings. Ordinarily, the Brown Act sets strict rules for teleconferencing. The governor's executive order has suspended those rules. The executive order does require that we continue to notice meetings in advance. The city has met all the applicable notice requirements. Members of the public may offer public comment by email to the Planning Commission at cupertino.org. Prior to the close of the public comment period for each agenda item, staff will share all such comments with the commission and committee subject to the time limits applicable to the public comment and make them part of the record. You can also phone 669-900-6833 and enter webinar ID 984-7175-6374, and you can type *9 to raise a hand to speak. Unregistered participants will be called on by the last 4 digits of their phone number. With that, let's go into the oral communications public comment piece. Staff, have you received any public comments on this item by email?
We did receive oral communication by email earlier today that I did forward to all of you from Jennifer Griffin. So I'll enter that into the packet information tomorrow. We do need to approve the minutes. And Jennifer Griffin is with us, so perhaps she would like to reiterate her thoughts, or I can read the email for you.
Sure, let's see if she's here with us and have her read their letter or read her thoughts and go there, and then we'll get to the minutes. Sorry about that, I jumped that, so.
She does have her hand up now, so if you would.
Let's do it. Let's call on Jennifer Griffin, and then we'll come back to the approval of minutes. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin, and yes, I did send an email to you all today because I'm very, very concerned about some of the issues that are going on. City of San Jose right now is trying to rezone suburban properties in the city for multifamily units. This echoes some of the big housing bills from Senator Weiner and Senator Atkins, and it is worrisome that the San Jose City Council is thinking about doing this in San Jose, and I'm going to use this as an example, because I think a lot of the residents don't even understand or know what the San Jose City Council is doing. I'm particularly concerned that the Shasta Handset district, which actually borders Diridon, it's on the Alameda Historic District. There are homes back to the 1860s. That area could be obliterated if we had up to 5, 6, 7 units per lot. And I mean, some of the lots are 5,000 square feet. Let's get realistic here. I think that there's a lot of people. I have a family member that owns a home in there, and I don't even know if she's aware that the city is doing this. I'm worried that the city, Willow Glen used to be a separate city until 1930. It was annexed into San Jose during the Depression, and it could be wiped out too if this type of, I will call it spot zoning, irresponsible zoning. And I take issue with San Jose City Council. By what right do they think that they have the right to do this? I'm also concerned about SB 9 and 10, which is Scott Weiner and Tony Atkins' big new housing bills. They don't seem to be concerned about the pandemic. All they want to push is to get rid of CEQA and get rid of the Coastal Commission. I'm having some really big problems with the responsibility of our elected officials and what they think they're representing in this state. And they don't seem to understand what democracy is, what was fought for at the White House. I hate to see what's happening in Sacramento. And believe me, I sure hope our city council isn't going to be as irresponsible and capricious as the San Jose City Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer Griffin. Do we have any other comments? And then we'll get to the approval of the minutes.
No, no one else has their hand up, and we've not received any emails.
Okay, so, all right, with that, let's move to the approval of the minutes. Subject draft minutes of January 12th, 2021. So we either approve or modify the draft minutes of January 12th, 2021. Commissioners, let's take a look at the minutes and see if you have any comments or questions. Okay. With no comments or questions, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Sure. I move we adopt the minutes as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second. I'll second.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? Probably not, but in case we do, all right, let's move on. Let's do a vote. Beth?
Oh, okay, thank you. Commissioner Kapil,
Yeah, aye. Approve.
Commissioner Takahashi,
Aye.
Commissioner Fung,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wong.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes 401 with Sexina absent.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Next item on the agenda number 2, if you're following, is a study session. And the study session is to compare standards for mixed-use developments at high-density residential guidelines and high-density residential guidelines with other cities. Recommended action is to receive the presentation and provide any input to staff. Let's go to staff with the staff report.
Hi, good evening, Planning Commission. I would like to introduce Jeff Zamora, Associate Planner, who will be going over the presentation for this subject with you. With that, I turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Pew. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Jeff Zamora, Associate Planner, Planning Division. Let me get my screen up here. Let's see. All right. All right, so once again, I'll be going over the mixed-use, high-density residential comparative study. So first off, a little bit of the background. This is part of the 2019-2020 City Council Work Program item. And the objective here is to compare mixed-use and high-density residential standards in other cities and compare them with Cupertino standards. Okay. So in putting the study together, the first thing that we wanted to identify was the study methodology, and to get that, we needed to determine the best sources for measurable standards in which to compare among the jurisdictions. And we identified 3 main sources, the first being zoning ordinances, which we found to be useful when they referenced, they were referenced by specific plans, but they didn't really have much else by way of development standards specific to mixed use or high density residential development. So they didn't have like a mixed use zoning designation that we could just, look up and just pull that information. But the next thing that we looked at was general plans, which does have some density and FAR standards, but very little else by way of objective standards. And finally, we looked at specific plans, which we found to be the best overall source for objective standards and criteria to compare among those other cities. So we've looked at through about a dozen municipal codes, zoning ordinances, about 17 specific plans. And we came to 5 specific plans within 3 jurisdictions for further analysis tonight. So 2 of those are in the city of San Jose, 2 of those are in Mountain View, and 1 is in Santa Clara. And I do want to note that the Santa Clara El Camino Real specific plan is still in public draft, but we thought it was very comprehensive and we wanted to use that in the study. So this analysis focuses on objective standards within these plan areas. And these documents, they have a lot of preference and a lot of recommendation language, which are useful in guiding development, but because that language tends to be more ambiguous, there were kind of difficult metrics to compare and evaluate. So for that reason, non-objective guidelines were excluded from this analysis. And we wanted to look at categories that could apply to the scale and development pattern in Cupertino to the extent possible. So the objective standards that we reviewed are setbacks, setbacks adjacent to residential or daylight planes, ground level design, maximum FAR and residential density, open space, and parking requirements. So first up, we have setbacks. One of the key points, it's very context dependent. Varies based on a number of factors, such as whether a development is located along a major or a minor street, the proximity to residential, etc. The plans also have emphasized standards for frontages, so frontage setbacks. The intent for that is to allow pedestrian-friendly space between the building wall and the curb lines, including wide sidewalks, shade trees, landscaping, activated uses like outdoor seating and outdoor dining. And for comparison, this table here shows an average setback range for those surveyed cities between 0 and 25 feet. And again, there's a lot of variables that could affect that. And that includes things like ground floor use, so commercial versus residential, where those setbacks are measured, and what's the use type across the street. So in comparison, Cupertino's heart of the city plan just applies a 35-foot setback measured from the face of the curb. And this includes a 26-foot landscape easement and then a 9-foot setback from the property line along Stevens Creek Boulevard. So here's a diagram from Mountain View's El Camino Real precise plan that shows an example of the setback differences for commercial versus residential / office uses along a typical street. So you'll see that commercial uses are set back a little less compared to residential uses, a little less to engage more with the activated uses in front of it. And then the residential is set back a little more for enhanced privacy and probably to allow a porch and some landscaping. So I also wanted to show these setback diagrams here. This is from the same Mountain View precise plan. And this contrasts the difference between one of their higher intensity areas with one of their lower intensity areas. Mountain View and Santa Clara are two of those cities that establish build-to lines, or essentially a maximum setback of what those frontages could be. So in the village center, it has a 15-foot maximum setback, for instance. The lower intensity area has a 25-foot maximum setback. And these building footprints in these diagrams, they're just for illustrative purposes. So it's not exactly where development has to go, but it's just, again, for those illustrative purposes. So moving on, adjacent to residential standards. So all plans have standards to address new development adjacent to existing residential. And one of those common methods is to include a daylight plane in one variation or another, typically at a 1-to-1 or a 45-degree daylight plane. So 1 foot setback for every 1 foot in height. You'll also see that just greater setbacks are applied. So greater setbacks when you're adjacent to residential. And finally, height limits and setbacks. So when a development is adjacent to existing residential, you would limit the height of the new development at the setback lines, and then you would apply a minimum step back for any additional floors above that. So here's comparing the other cities with Cupertino. Both the surveyed cities and Cupertino, again, they apply those daylight planes. Again, other cities are 1-to-1. Cupertino is a little higher ratio at 1.5-to-1 setback to height ratio, as well as a rear minimum setback of 20 feet and then 30 feet in certain designated areas, and a side setback of half the height of the building or 10 feet, whichever is greater. And these setbacks are kind of within the range of the other surveyed cities, anywhere between 15 to 40 feet. That 40 feet limit, that's kind of the upper limit, and that really kind of depends in some cases on the height of the building that's being proposed. So for instance, the 40-foot setback would apply to buildings over 65 feet or greater, and that would be like in San Jose's Winchester Urban Village Plan. And a few plans limit the heights for development or portions along development adjacent to residential, and apply daylight planes or minimum setbacks for additional stories above that height limit. And I'll show you on the next slide, kind of a diagram of how that is applied. So figure 4.6, this is in Mountain View's San Antonio precise plan, residential neighborhood transition area. So for a development next to an adjacent 2-story residential zone, you would have, they would have a 25-foot setback, this assuming the setback line, and a cap of no more than 1 additional story at that setback line. So every, if additional height is permitted, every additional floor has a setback by at least 10 feet. The top right here shows a similar situation. This is in Santa Clara's plan, applying that 45-degree daylight plane, and that's set from the adjacent residential property line. And again, that height at the setback line, it's capped at 1 additional story, and then every additional floor after that, it's regulated by that daylight plane. And then on the bottom right is Mountain View's El Camino Real plan. And this actually shows treatment for assuming adjacent or residential across the street. So in this case, for streets that are 80 feet or less, you would cap that the height of the development to the same as the height limits of the residential zone within 40 feet of the property line. And this would not apply to streets that are wider than 80 feet in this instance. All right, moving on to heights. So heights in surveyed cities range from anywhere from 2 stories or 35 feet in the smaller mixed-use centers, and it can go all the way up to 150 feet in those higher intensity areas. So that's a broad range, but you know, that really covers all of the land use designations in all of the specific plans that we looked at. And I wanted to note that, you know, height among these cities is relative. So a short building in San Jose would not necessarily be a short building in Cupertino. But looking at Cupertino's height limits, that's a 60-foot in North Velco Special Area, 75 feet on the Hamptons property, and then 45 feet along the major transit corridors like Stevens Creek and De Anza. Again, with that 30 feet in certain designated adjacent residential neighborhoods. Some other points I wanted to make is that the tallest height allowances tend to be concentrated towards the center of a specific plan and along major intersections. And the lower buildings are more along the periphery or the edges, and especially when they're adjacent to residential. These areas also tend to have higher numbers of existing and proposed transit stops. So the higher the allowable buildings, the more existing and proposed transit stops there may be. And taller buildings are also correlated to FAR and residential density. So the taller the building height, the higher the FAR and residential density. And then this is the height diagram from San Jose Stevens Creek Boulevard Urban Village Plan. First, I just wanted to identify like those major intersections along Stevens Creek. So Lawrence Expressway here, Saratoga Avenue, and San Tomas Expressway. And you'll notice that the darker the shade of blue, the higher the allowable height limits. So Saratoga Avenue has, you know, the darkest at 150, Lawrence is 120, and San Tomas is 85. And those are really the major intersections, and everywhere else along the precise plan is anywhere between 65 and 85 feet, with really only a small area here at 45 feet. And so this is kind of more of an outlier, and it's pretty much already developed. So again, that standard is really more 65 to 85 feet, you'll see.
And it's all south of El Camino, is that correct?
Yeah, everything north is Santa Clara. Yeah.
Oh, got it. That's right. That's the border. Yep.
Okay. And then also wanted to show This from Mountain View's El Camino Real plan, just the existing and proposed transit stops and BRT stops. Again, many of these future and potential BRT locations, they're going to be located along the intersections of village centers and along Castro Miramonte areas. And those are the areas with the largest height allowances, especially compared to the neighborhood corners in blue, which has significantly less. So everything in like the pink, everything in, I guess this is purple or something. This is just got more stops. So at this time, we're kind of made it through the halfway point. I wanted to see if you guys wanted to take a break, ask questions, or you wanted me to continue.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see if anybody has any questions for the first set of items that you've presented. I think that's probably a good spot, talking about setback heights and ground level design and FAR.
Yeah, I have a question. If you have a kind of a commercial property and you have a in neighborhood residential, what's the criteria for the setback? Is there any consideration for the commercial property in the neighborhood, like Apple Campus and let's say some of the houses nearby? So what's the criteria in those cases?
I just want to make sure I'm getting your question. You're asking for what setback standards are for a commercial property adjacent to residential?
Yeah.
And is that, are you asking specifically in Cupertino or just?
I'm just asking related to Cupertino, yes.
Related to Cupertino. Yeah, I could pull up that table again. And this is, let me see.
Jeff, while you do that, maybe I can start.
Sure.
A little bit. So in Cupertino, the general plan has certain height to setback ratios that are established for major streets. And those, major streets, they're called different things. They're called arterials, boulevards, major collectors, minor collectors. Those are the three types of streets that have certain height to setback ratios established. Mostly that is a 1-to-1 ratio, essentially meaning you have to have a 1 foot setback from the curb line for every foot of height increase. For certain areas, particularly between the the south side of Homestead Road, between, I want to say Lynette Lane and Tantau, there is a 1.5-to-1 setback ratio, which means you have to be set back 1.5 feet for every 1 foot height increase. So for Apple Campus, along the side that fronts Homestead, there is a 1.5-to-1 ratio for where that building is set. For for along Wolf Road, that is also 1.5-to-1, if I'm correct. On Tantau Avenue, it used to be 1.5-to-1, but Apple had they got a general plan amendment for a 1-to-1 ratio for certain portions of that project. So if that answers your question as it relates to the Apple Campus.
Actually, I need a little bit more clarification. In general, I was giving an Apple Campus as an example, but what's the general guideline? I can understand based on the height. You're saying 1.5:1 or 1:1. Is there any consideration of having the commercial property next to the residential apart from the height? So whatever the guidelines you're showing me is kind of showing that with respect to the height, what is the 1.5 or 1:half height of the building, and you have that. What consideration is there that if it is a residential to residential versus residential to commercial? Is there anything other than the height?
The general plan doesn't qualify that, and it's particularly because it's across the street. So it does not have any different regulations as far as the height to setback ratio is concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questioners from other commissions? Any other
So
questions?
just to follow up on that, with regard to the Apple Campus, the setback issues are not really a consideration for the main campus because it's, pretty isolated from the area around it. It has a large green belt around it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think at the very minimum, and hope I'm not off by a whole lot, but I think it's like close to a 200-foot setback
Yeah.
from the property, from the curb, if I'm not mistaken.
So then it actually, but I think this does become a consideration at Tantal, for the Tantal complex across the street. So can we say in absolute terms, if you were living adjacent to the Tantal buildings, the rear setback of those buildings, what's the requirement there?
So that's an interesting question, because north of the creek over there, there's Calabasas Creek that kind of clips the corner of the campus in a sense. North of the creek, there is an existing easement that is granted to those property owners that live back there in Santa Clara. So you cannot have development, I believe it's taller than 15 feet, within 150 feet of that property line. So there is that requirement. So you have to be set back at a minimum for those buildings. I think they're set back at a minimum 150 feet or something close to that.
Right. Okay. But otherwise, the required setback, it looked like it was going to be 20 feet. Is that correct? With minding all the other.
I would have to look into that. I can't.
Okay.
I don't have that information at the top of my head. But one of the things that we would probably look at, I think it would be based on the base zoning, and I think that is zoned planned office,
Yes.
planning office, if that makes sense. It's PMP, and I think the minimum rear setback over there, it has certain setbacks, and I think it's 4 times the height of the building and no less than something. So that's the minimum setback that would have been required.
Great, thank you. I actually wanted to comment. I do have some questions on the material that's been covered so far, but I'll reserve them for later if that's okay.
Okay, sounds good. Any other commissioners with a question? I think Commissioner Takahashi, I think you were going to say something. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I guess this question, the Santa Clara interpretation of the adjacent property line versus isn't our interpretation curbside versus adjacent property on the other side of the street? Just want to make sure I understand that difference.
Yeah. So
Does that make sense?
yeah. So let me pull up the diagram that I think you're referencing, and this is
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Santa Clara's diagram right here, and this is across the street. The way that Santa Clara measures their, I guess their setback is from their property line. In heart of the city, that setback is measured from the curb.
Right. So from the adjacent property line versus from the applicant or the project property line.
So
right.
From the so
from the
project
sidewalk or
from
easement.
From the project property line, it would be within the 40 feet of the development's property line. They can't exceed the height of the residential zone across the street. Right.
So the net impact though is Santa Clara's requirement is less stringent, right, by the width of the street in terms of the daylight plane.
I guess
is that a true statement?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Right, because for Santa Clara, you would stand on the opposite side of the street to assess the daylight plane at 45 degrees. In Cupertino, you would be on the far side of the street or on the side of the project. That's, I guess, the difference. I'm just trying to make sure I understand is accurate.
I'm not sure.
The daylight is still on the side of the subject property, correct? It's not. It doesn't go from across the street. All they do is
right, but that's not what I thought I heard in the presentation in terms of Santa Clara's interpretation of the daylight plane, though. So can you pull that figure up?
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I was sharing it this whole time too. So this is the diagram that you're looking at. Yeah.
Right.
No, the way they measure the height restriction is at the property line of the developing property. So from the property line here, assuming that this is the new development, it's measured 40 feet from their property line.
It's basically, if you were there first, the other property needs to conform.
Right, and Santa Clara's 45-degree daylight plane only applies at the when the property line is shared, is my understanding, and that's shown in the image directly above.
Right. So this 45-degree plane applies if it's
I see.
If it's next door.
I see. Right. Okay. So it's not a situation where there's a thoroughfare in between and the property lines are divided by some fixed distance, but the shared property line. Okay, thanks.
right.
Not across the street, yeah.
All right.
And related
Okay.
to that, actually, just one more thing on that
Mhm.
same illustration, you made a comment about 80 feet, that those rules were applicable. Did I catch that correctly? The rules were applicable only when the street width is less than 80 feet.
That's correct. So in the case of this, if it's 80 feet or less, then this applies. More than that, it does not apply.
That would
Right.
generally, so for
So-
instance, it was interesting, right, on the El Camino specific plan, it would never be just 80 feet. So, right, I mean, that would be 4 lanes at least.
I think it's meant for purposes of the smaller feeder streets that feed onto El Camino. It's kind of meant to get that interaction.
You know, there would be many streets feeding in that are, 4
Yeah.
lanes.
Yeah, and that diagram was a diagram for residential streets. So again, like not necessarily El Camino Real itself.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. One last. So the whole point of the study session is to compare our setback and other requirements, height requirements to these other cities that are in close proximity. And you had nice tables, but is there going to be a conclusion from the standpoint of, what I concluded based on looking at the numbers is that Cupertino is most restrictive relative to those elements compared to our neighbors. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, some of the standards, they're comparable. Some we may be a little more apply stricter standards. Really, I think.
What's the point of doing this, right? If we're not going to draw a conclusion, right?
Yeah.
It's great information,
yeah.
but it seems to me there needs to be a finding. What's the finding in terms of heights and setbacks? I guess
Yeah,
is what I'm pressing for.
and the work program item was simply to compare Cupertino standards to, neighboring jurisdictions.
Check.
I would say let's let Jeff continue his presentation and let's jump back into it. We can talk about comparisons.
Okay.
We can also look at population to square foot densities between the 3 cities. That'll give you an idea, and mass transit corridors that are running, which actually affect transit based housing initiatives as well.
Agreed. No, definitely. The transit is the big element that drives density with regard to the planning in general, and the fact that there's minimal transit is one of the elements that reduces density requirements and ABAG requirements that we get allocated. So I guess just from the standpoint of looking at the assessment, I'm just looking for some conclusions. And if,
Oh, yeah, no,
there
fair.
aren't
I
any,
was-
then
I get where you're going. I get where you're going. I'm just saying there's
Yeah.
a spectrum of quality of life elements that we can consider by the time we get to the bottom. So, all right, well, keep going, Jeff. What do you have?
Okay.
Commissioner Kapil, do you have any questions? Sorry.
Yeah, I just was wondering that what was the thinking when they decided 1.5:1, kind of a setback to height ratio?
Heart of the city?
Some kind of a logic behind this ratio compared to 1:1 or what other cities have. So that's kind of a thing I was wondering, that if you have any insight in it.
Commissioner Kapil, if I may, could you repeat your question? I couldn't quite catch the first part.
So I'm just wondering that 1.5:1 setback to height ratio, which you presented in one of the slides. What was the thinking behind that when you decided that kind of a ratio? What I saw in other places that 1:1 or a different kind of a setback to height ratio. So what went in the decision making for 1.5:1 setback to height ratio?
I can try to take that, Jeff. So that was established during the Heart of the City specific planning process that went on in 1995. Obviously, developmental pressures were not as high at that time, and there was lots of concern with regard to privacy and impacts to neighborhoods and adjacent properties. And as a result, council at the time adopted the 1.5:1 setback to height ratio for the property line. And so you can get buildings as close as 20 feet tall. The setback only 20 feet. Yeah, but you still have to have you still have to meet the 1.5 to 1 setback.
Commissioner Capil, I think I would add this. In 2005, in the heart of the city plan, this was really about a grand vision of what that would be. That includes the trees, the outdoor purposes, a really high quality pedestrian friendly area. And I think that 1 to 1.5 setback was to give that beautiful kind of open space kind of feeling that was going to be there.
And I just wanted to clarify, the 1.5 to 1 is only from the rear. From the front, it's a 1 to 1 setback to height.
Yeah, and yes, yeah, exactly.
But this was actually one of my later comments as well, maybe more toward deliberation, but if the staff, I think actually the heart of the city plan actually dates back to 1993. Is that correct? 2005 or 2008 was the revision.
Last update. It was the last update.
Last
yes.
update.
I believe when it was first adopted, it was 1995, but we can certainly check and look into that. I think it started in 93, but by the time it was adopted, it was 1995.
Yeah.
And then it was it has been amended many times since, at least 7 or 8 times since that time.
So I would just say I would just comment that as, for some context here, the decisions for the kind of setbacks of 1 to 1 or 1.5 to 1, these really are dating back 35 years or 25 years, excuse me.
For the record, I'd say they've also been updated since 2005 in the specific plan, so they've been reviewed
Well,
as well. So.
Actually, if you go and look at the 1993 plan, you'll actually see that those exist there. There may be exceptions that were cut out, small exceptions that were cut out, but I think that the general setback and layout, the
Fundamental design has stayed the same. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, and that last revisit was 15 years ago.
Okay, well, let's move on. Jeff, what do you have?
Okay. Reshare my screen here. Oop. I'm not sharing, are I?
Not yet. We can see it now.
All right, there we go.
And then,
Okay.
That was dangerous, leaving us a slide for that. No, I was kidding.
Yeah,
Keep going. No, we appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so ground level design. Let's see. So standards for ground level design, they actually have more to do with ground level commercial in particular. So all the plans specify objective standards for ground floor commercial. As noted previously back in the setback section, these ground floor commercial uses, they tend to be set closer to the curb line, again, to engage better with activated spaces. And usually that's a difference of a 5-foot minimum setback between if it's a commercial versus a residential ground floor use. And again, it's generally consistent among each other for dimensions with a minimum of 14 to 15 ground to ceiling height and a 40 to 60 foot depth for those ground floor commercial uses. Some land use designations within a specific plan, such as Mountain View and Santa Clara, may also require a certain percentage of commercial frontage, and that ranges anywhere between 33% all the way up to 100%. In addition, there may be some plan areas that have ground floor commercial overlays, in which case it's 100% commercial. And a lot of times those are along the major frontages, so Winchester or Stevens Creek or El Camino. So in contrast, Cupertino doesn't have those objective standards for commercial spaces itself, but it does apply a minimum 75% active commercial frontage and a 50% active commercial uses along the rear within the heart of the city plan.
Jeff, related to that, does that make us less restrictive or more restrictive for commercial? It almost kind of falls in the range. So again, those commercial frontages, they could ask for anywhere between 33 and to 100. Heart of the city, it kind of falls smack dab in between. Okay, good to know.
And then I just wanted to show a diagram here. This is from the Winchester Urban Village Plan showing those required commercial standards. So 50-foot depth and then a 50-foot floor to ceiling height. And then kind of what that could look like in practice. And then just one more from Mountain View San Antonio precise plan. Again, they're asking for 14-foot floor to ceiling height in this area. And then they also show some active street frontage. And then this is just an image of what that could look like for context. Moving on to FAR and residential density. So again, like some of the other standards, it's highly variable. Similar to height standards, it's typically correlate with higher intensity areas and they're located along major intersections. FAR typically applies to the overall development, but sometimes it's only applied to standalone commercial or the commercial portions of a mixed-use project. So residential density, that could vary anywhere between 8 to 250 dwelling units an acre. And you'll typically see that density more in the average of 45 to 60 dwelling units an acre. Again, it's high and low density, it's relative, it's very context based. 8 dwelling units an acre is actually kind of on the much lower end, and it really only covers a very nominal number of lots within, I believe, the Winchester Urban Village Plan. FAR, it can range anywhere between 0.1 to 2.0 in the lower intensity areas, and near residential neighborhoods to between 1.35 to 8 in higher intensity areas. So Cupertino's residential density ranges between 25 dwelling units an acre along Stevens Creek Boulevard, 15 to 25 along De Anza, and 15 dwelling units an acre in Monte Vista. Cupertino has no established FAR for non-residential development. Instead, it regulates development with the development allocation in the general plan. And I wanted to show a few samples of, and this is from Santa Clara's El Camino Real specific plan, just to provide some context on the different development intensities. So this is their regional commercial mixed use activity center. This is what a development in the range of 55 to 100 dwelling units an acre will look like. Santa Clara is one of the cities that actually applies a minimum commercial FAR as well. So that's kind of what this would look like as well. Ground floor commercial along the first floor. Corridor mixed use, residential density 45 to 65 dwelling units an acre. And then corridor residential at 16 to 45 dwelling units an acre. So more your traditional attached townhomes. Going on to open space. All cities set an open space requirement. These are for landscape requirements, and it could be based on the total parcel area and or common usable open space and private open space that's set by a minimum square foot per unit. Additionally, they all require parkland dedication or fees per the Quimby Act. It can either be, those requirements can either be met through dedication of land for public parks, they can pay an in lieu fee, or they can provide publicly accessible park facilities on site in the range of 3 acres per 1,000 residents, or a combination of all three. So comparing these cities with Cupertino, all the cities, again, they require that parkland dedication, and they reference their applicable code chapter. Additionally, all cities, including Cupertino, they set footage minimums for common usable outdoor and private open space per unit. Cupertino, as you can see, is pretty much within the range of the surveyed cities. Some cities, such as Mountain View and Santa Clara, require a certain percentage of open space or landscaping based on the overall parcel size. And then to meet those parkland requirements, the developer can incorporate courtyards, plazas, or parks into their project. So these are intended to be publicly accessible, and they can either be privately owned and publicly accessible open space, also known as POPOs, or dedicated to the city, either in land or with an in lieu fee. And then, as mentioned previously, common usable open space is also a requirement set by those cities, and it's at a set square footage per unit. So examples to meet this requirement include things like inner courtyards with amenities like pools, outdoor seating, outdoor dining, barbecue pits, rooftop decks, rooftop gardens. And then some of these plans allow a credit towards the Quimby Act for a portion of common usable open space. And then private open space, again, a few examples in the form of balconies, decks, front porches, or patios. And then kind of similar to the common open space, some plans allow a credit towards meeting that requirement for a portion of private open space. And finally, parking. Generally, plans, the specific plans default to the regulations in the parking ordinance. And those requirements are based on the proposed uses within that new development. Cities also can identify parking reduction strategies, and that includes submitting transportation demand management or a TDM plan, or they can meet certain criteria that are specified in the specific plan or in the zoning ordinance to get that parking reduction. So here's a comparison table with some of the more common use types that you would see in a mixed use development. Parking for residential units is for the other cities, studio and a 1 bedroom, 1 space per unit, 2 bedroom or more is 2 spaces per unit. Cupertino is by contrast, it's a little higher. It's just rather than just a bedroom count, the code applies just a 2 space per unit, 1 being open and 1 being enclosed. Retail and office ratios are comparable to Cupertino, generally within that range. The difference is that the restaurant parking requirement in Cupertino is higher, with 1 for every 4 seats plus 1 space for every employee compared to 1 space for every 2.5 to 3 seats. And again, they could submit a TDM plan to get that parking reduction. Cupertino also looks at or considers parking studies. And there's a section in the parking ordinance for reduced parking for shared uses. So in summary, kind of what we've touched on throughout, it's just that Cupertino standards are pretty comparable to the surveyed cities. But we also may want to consider adopting requirements for ground floor commercial design. Those are those setbacks for ground floor commercial uses, height, depth requirements that the other cities have incorporated. And that's really just to allow for better scale and engagement at the street level. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot, Jeff. Appreciate the presentation. Any questions from the commissioners? And then we'll see if there's any public comment as well.
I have a question on the mixed use case which was shown here. Is there a special guideline for the open spaces for the mixed use property, like which has a dwelling, the commercial both, or is it kind of the same guideline per unit for the open space, like what you have shown in your? I couldn't catch any specific mixed use to pure dwelling open space allocation difference.
You're asking. Yeah, you're asking for open space requirements for Cupertino.
Yes.
So when we're looking at like a potential mixed use development, that would really default to our parkland dedication ordinance. So it's the regulations in the Quimby Act. So, and it's either dedication of land for public parks, you pay an in lieu fee, or you provide publicly accessible open space on the development at the rate of 3 acres per 1,000 residents, or a combination of those 3.
Oh, 3 acres per, you said?
1,000 residents. If that can't be accommodated, it's working with that applicant, and maybe getting some type of combination of those three requirements.
So I can add to that, Commissioner Capel. So there are two sets of requirements essentially. One is for publicly land that is donated or dedicated to the city as a park, and that is a requirement for projects that are larger than 50 units. If you're a project that is smaller than 50 units, that is off the table. But if you're a project larger than 50 units, then you fall into the realm of having to dedicate land to the city. In addition to that, there are common usable open space requirements, and that is dependent on the type of use. So if you're proposing some commercial, some office, and some residential, the heart of the city has certain standards that you have to apply for each of those pieces. I believe, and Jeff, maybe you can pull this up, I think it's 2% of the space for office. For commercial, there's another calculation, 5% or something like that. And then for residential units, it is 60 square feet per unit. And all of that is considered private open space for each of those pieces. In addition to that, there also, the Quimby Act and our ordinance allows for a certain amount of credit against the Quimby Act requirements for the private open space that you provide. And so that is also built into the ordinance. So you actually, in essence, may have to dedicate less land because of the private open space that you're providing. And so that you get a credit against what you're providing for the development, for the residents of that development itself. So
That's
kind of how it works.
And there's, yeah, I was saying, for those following in the public, right, between the Quimby Act and your park ordinances, those are the two things that dictate that open space.
Okay, just to make sure that everything's clear here, I think that one of the questions that Commissioner Capel asked was there is no. So first of all, could you confirm there's no linkage between the Quimby Act requirement and commercial space that you build?
Correct. Quimby Act only applies to residential development.
Right. And that was something that they touched on indirectly in that, in answering that question. But when you're talking about things like the Quimby requirement required you to dedicate land when you have more than 50 units, that's 50 residential units, and commercial space does not apply there. I would also comment, just as a note here, that the Quimby Act, the revision of the Quimby Act that's currently in force and is the city ordinance are built around, there is not a requirement that space be provided. A residential project doesn't need to provide that space on site. They just need to meet that requirement, in a way that I believe it has to have a nexus where it can serve the people, serve the people who live there, or alternately identify an underserved area and provide services there. So there are a lot of open space restrictions are a particularly difficult and challenging area, in a place where the land is very, very expensive. So, I think that there's a lot of misstatement, about what are the requirements, the open space requirements. I just hope we can keep that clear. I guess I'll just add one other thing. Sunnyvale just recently, passed a number of kind of their downtown, they don't call it a specific plan, maybe it's a precise plan for their downtown redevelopment. And one of the core tenets there, if you go to the city line, which is, what they call that project, there are actually quite a few large parks there. That is specifically done. One part of their plan is that they trade height. They allow buildings to be greater in height to allow more ground space open, to allow more ground level open space. So that's an intentional choice that was made. And you see that, that across from the rail station, there's a very large park there. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions from any of the commissioners?
In the section on allowable heights, there was a little talk about the heights for the heights that are allowed in the heart of the city plan. I'm curious if you could speak to how the city center project, how that ties into that. I mean, it's obviously more than 45 feet tall.
I can speak to that. Because
I know you can. We've had this discussion before.
Setting up questions here, I see.
So the 1993 general plan actually allowed quite a bit of height in the general plan itself. In the North De Anza area, it allowed 75 feet in height. It also allowed 75 feet in height in the Valco areas in certain parts, and also in the North Valco special area, I believe. And in this, for the city center, that was developed under a master plan. And that master plan was adopted, I believe, sometime in the mid 80s. And that allowed a fair bit of height. That general plan allowed a fair bit of height. And I think the 93 general plan allowed them to proceed under, the height limitations that were in effect at that time. When the, that development, what is it called now? The Montebello, was developed in 2000. And I believe that building ranges between 60 feet and 99 feet or 102 feet or something in that range. And I think the hotel and the office tower, which was the first piece that was built, actually goes up to, I believe, 124 feet. So those were all developed as part of that master plan. However, after that was developed in 2000, there was certainly the community was displeased with that particular development. And when the general plan was being updated for the 2005, that process actually started in 2000, and the general plan was not adopted until 2005. And as a result, based on community outcry, the height limitations were reduced significantly all over the city. And so they went down to 45 feet for much of the city. 30 feet was always allowed in the neighborhoods. And then in Valco as well, the height limitation went down. So,
and what year was that again?
The general plan was adopted in 2005. I believe it was October 2005.
Actually, it's interesting. I don't know how many of you actually go back to the days when the Cali grain mill was there, but that was actually pretty tall too. So not as tall as the hotel is today, but more than 45 feet. Thanks.
Just one more question about the parking. I mean, you have very inconsistent parking all over the city. Basically, the newer developments have a vertical parking which takes much less space, whereas some other commercial properties like Home Depot, Target, they have a huge lot where that land can be more purposefully used if you had a higher parking lot, like multi-story parking lot type of a situation as currently the Apple or other newer constructions have it. So, is there any guideline in the planning which basically tries to enforce the land reclamation based on the new parking standard? Because kind of you can see that in Target, it's a huge parking lot with have a land that's basically pretty much wasted. Just a comment.
I can try to answer that. The city doesn't regulate how parking is provided. That is basically developer or business driven. So Target was originally a Gemco, which was back from the 1960s, I want to say. And these companies have a philosophy of having a larger parking lot in front of the stores in order to entice people to go into the stores. That's kind of their business philosophy. As far as the city goes, we can't force them to put in parking structures. They do cost more money than putting in a surface grade parking lot. So, if there has been talk about redevelopment, I also just want to point out that the Home Depot is in San Jose, but in general, that's their philosophy. Like Costco and Home Depot and all these businesses generally like big parking lots in front of their stores and around their stores. So, if a development opportunity does come up where they do propose structured parking and then, wish to develop the rest of the property, as long as it meets the regulations and zoning requirements, it's something that we would process and bring forward for approval by the Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Let's see what the public has. Any comments from the public? Let's move to that. Let's see. Anyone with a comment, please raise your hand or add a comment, and we'll give you 3 minutes to talk. So, Beth, who do we have? Anyone? Don't see any hands. Okay. All right, we'll move on to any other comments commissioners may have, and we'll close out on the study item. Anything else? I'll leave one final comment before we go then. I think it's important to think about it. I believe Mountain View is something like 12 square miles and about 80,000 people. And Cupertino is about 60-some thousand people and about 11 square miles. I think one of the important things at some point in time, we have to decide what we want to be as we grow up. So are we more like a Los Altos and Saratoga? Or are we more like a Mountain View or Santa Clara or Sunnyvale? And I think that's been the big discussion for quite some time. So one's more transit-based, more dense, and the other one is more mountain, more rural, more open space. So I think it's an interesting thing. We're kind of stuck in the middle, and I think that's what a lot of the comments and strong opinions have been over the past 10 years or more. So I'll leave it at that.
So I've got a long list of comments here.
All right. Well, since this may be your last meeting, let's go. Go for it.
Well, it's very likely to be. So I'm curious about the criteria for which the cities that were selected were, how they were chosen. On one hand, there's some commonalities. There were, one of the things that wasn't cited in the report is that all the projects that you're reviewing happen to be along the VTA primary transit lines, right? And that's actually a good thing. The number 1 transit line for VTA is El Camino. The number 2 transit line is Stevens Creek Boulevard. So I think that was a good thing. But I'm curious, there were a number of maybe one in particular that I was curious about was the North Bayshore specific plan in Mountain View. This is the redevelopment for the Google Park area, not Google Park area, the current Googleplex headquarters area. So I'm curious why that didn't how was that not qualified as a area for comparison?
I think that was one of the dozen plus specific plans that we did consider. I think ultimately that one was not considered due to the fact that we wanted to focus on specific plans that had those major transit corridors, kind of like you alluded to, the El Caminos, the Stevens Creek. It just didn't seem.
I would actually comment there were a number of reasons. The North Bayshore Precise Plan actually is much farther reaching and much more forward-looking than most of the other plans that were done in the area. I mean, something like the El Camino plan in Santa Clara is really guiding the transition of El Camino, which is not a massive, it's less massive translation than what's happening at North Bayshore. One of the things I would say, in looking at the North Bayshore plan, there's much higher yield of all the different kinds of land use there. At the same time, they were very, very concerned about transit. They have the highest single trip reduction, traffic plan of anything in the Bay Area. That includes Stanford. So there are a number of things to be learned there about the kinds of things you can do to mitigate traffic. There was a lot of focus on the design of North Bayshore around, even though it's a large development area, and that is one part where it is different than the kinds of projects that we undertake in Cupertino where they're not 40 acres. But they really focus very hard on human scale design in the actual built elements. And I think that the combination of that at the larger kind of higher level of production is actually something very interesting to look at kind of comparatively. They also had a very high affordable housing target there. You know, when you've got a kind of top 10 company that's one of the big participants there, you know, Google, you know, who's an active developer on that project, they can afford to have 20% affordable housing. But this is, again, it's illustrative as a way that those sorts of things could be achieved. And then I think that it's also interesting because there's a, you know, North Bay Shore is notable because it was previously an industrial and commercial only area with no residential, and that they're kind of again trying to lead the way there and trying to make a transition. So, for instance, one of the rules that applies in Shorebird, which is one of the three developmental areas in North Bay Shore, is that for every square foot of office building they build 2 square feet of residential space. And that kind of thing is actually a very interesting takeaway to understand how can that be, you know, how can that work? What kinds of things allow that to happen? And I think that when you're facing, you know, in the next few years here, with an enormous RENA requirement to try to meet, that asking those kinds of questions, what does it take to get 2 feet of residential for every foot of commercial space? I would also say that, again, their location is a little different in terms of open space, but, you know, absolutely state of the art in open space as well. So I would just say for a number of different reasons, there's a very good model, a very good and recent model. I do worry a little, and I think that this came up in the discussion, that there's a certain shading of the results here. I think one of the conclusions was that we're comparable to most of our communities. I think that if you actually chart out the objective criteria, we're probably not comparable. You know, the setbacks, you know, there was the discussion about setback analysis in the first section, which is, you know, cities have a 0 to 25 foot setback on arterials. That sort of was presented as, you know, that this was, you know, activation of the street, when in fact I think that it's really more like a wide sidewalk is kind of what they're saying there, as opposed to, you know, on an arterial, the objective was not, I don't think, was to have, you know, dining on you know, on El Camino or on Lawrence Expressway, as much as it was, you know, as much as it was that it wasn't a 5 foot sidewalk or a 0 setback. You know, in some cases even then, you know, actually it is a 0 setback. On the side streets, a 25 foot setback is pretty enormous, but that's really, now you're really talking about something like downtown Campbell, rather than something like Stevens Creek. So I think we want to just make sure that we, you know, are kind of making an accurate comparison. I think the build 2 lines were another example of this, where there's a number there, and that number is a little bit, I don't know, it's not really like our number, because we have a 1-to-1 requirement on many of the, you know, on the street front. You can't really build any significant height 15 feet from the, you know, unless you want a 1-story building. I mean, you're limited to 1 story, really. You know, in the urban village plans, the San Jose urban village plans were cited there. You know, they have, it's probably a little bit, I think it's a little bit greater than, it's probably 20 or 25 feet on the roadside, but that may be facing up to a 60-foot building. So it's a very different kind of slope situation. So I would just say, you know, again, if we believe these are useful comparisons because they are, you know, they are similarly situated, then I think that what you'll see is that the heart of the city is not very reflective of the kind of standards that exist elsewhere, and I think that's a perfectly fine takeaway. Let's see. I mentioned the points earlier around allowable heights and park space. Parking is a really, I mean, it's an interesting one to me. You know, it's very clear that in a lot of what you see, whether it's new legislation or in general, I think modern, modern urban design, the prioritization, the high prioritization of cars is usually one of the things that's not encouraged. So, I would just say on the first slide there, we had a thing where, I think our residential parking requirement is high relative to, it is high in, these kind of mixed use or higher density environments. Again, that doesn't mean you necessarily need to push the limit. I think that any project of size actually gets its parking approved by study rather than by the normal criteria. But I would just say, there are many factors that are changing the thinking around whether it's more important to build for cars or to build for people. The VMT to LOS change is a perfect example of that. So I would just say that, one of the things I'm concerned about, I think if you turn back the clock and look 35 years ago at the standards for, the building standards for Santa Clara or Sunnyvale or Mountain View, they probably wouldn't look a whole lot different than what we have in the heart of the city. It's just, we have a kind of old document and a lot of old standards. I would just highly encourage that the takeaway from this be, that rather than the kind of, I would really say that there's something substantively different here, and that's if that's where people want to go and that's what they choose, that's fine. It's just it will yield something very different, and that's I think that's the reason to have this study. Let's see, and I guess that's really, I think that the biggest challenge, clearly the biggest challenge for the council, for the current council, will be starting to tee up for addressing the RENA requirements. That will require building more, and it will require building more housing, and that will generally be taller, although it doesn't need to be 10-story buildings. I mean, I don't think that's really if you chose to generally have low heights and concentrate heights, then maybe you would have an area that had very tall buildings to try to meet that kind of standard. But I think it's generally not. For the heart of the city, I guess for the heart of the city standards, one of the things you'd see is the reason I asked the question about the city center project is that as part of the heart of the city obviously stands out. But one of the interesting things is, I think if you drive down Stevens Creek, what you see are a lot of 1- and 2-story buildings when, under the current, even under the current zoning, 3-story buildings would not be, would be more the norm. So, with a lot of 1-story buildings instead, there's actually a lot of opportunity there to build something not even necessarily wildly out of the envelope of heart of the city, heart of the city height limits. That gives you the opportunity to have more built space and to actually meet a lot of the housing need. I think that as a city, we'll be much healthier if we can meet those meet the housing need here. That it will only help stimulate the business, only help make it possible to have a healthy community. And I just think that I mean, we'll touch on this immediately in the next item, that the heart of the city, I mean, when you look at the heart of the city rear requirement, a 1.5 to 1 ratio. So what we're talking about is, if you were talking about building in some of these other towns, you would need to have 20 feet and then a requirement for some step back. Here, if you wanted to have a 40-foot building, you need to have 60 feet of open space behind it. It's just totally. I think that's very difficult. It's very difficult to. It's going to be very difficult to produce the kinds of things that the kind of structures we'll need for the future. With rules that are 35 years old guiding that. So those are my comments. I really feel like it's important that we should make the most of a study, make sure that people are really getting a clear picture here of what does it mean, where do we stand relative to others. Ray, I completely agree. The city has a choice about where it wants to go. It kind of has made some of that choice. When one of the biggest company in the world makes its home here, we're pretty much not going to be like Los Altos. But that, there's a lot of different things that can come out of that. Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Takahashi, looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, I guess I'll just kind of summarize my thoughts on this whole topic as well, since why not?
Sure, pile on. It's your last meeting.
We're talking about 1995 as when the heart of the city really kind of was last really conceived and or pictured what we really wanted. So just to give you a little perspective, 1995, your average house in Cupertino probably around $300,000 to $400,000. Now it's $2 to $2.5 million, right? So the whole prospect of affordable ownership in the city doesn't exist. And so, that's why there's been a lot of discussion around regionally, how do we solve this problem? Because we can't run away from this problem. You can't hide from the housing issue and the high cost of living, which makes it less desirable to live here, unless you happen to have purchased in 1995, right? In which case, oh, hey, have at it. So, thinking that, hey, we're just going to not pay attention to these numbers and not strive to at least contribute as best we can to solving the regional problem, I think is not going to be a good direction for the city in the long term. I'm not saying let's build things out to the highest density possible, as much as, let's look at densities that we can achieve such that we can increase the housing supply and therefore be at least perceived as trying to work in that direction versus stiff-arming any development and really pushing back on every single element of the desired outcome for the region. So, it's just part of what happened to this area in terms of the change over the last 20 years. And it's really created an interesting and unique place, but housing affordability is a huge problem. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Takahashi. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just blurt out, what is it you're trying to accomplish? I mean, one of the things I think people express concern about is that the kind of businesses that can survive here seem to be, declining. Of course, we're in a weird, COVID is a weird time that's not helping. But, the general health of the city, the health and vitality, I think that making some of these changes that allow us to have, to have more housing space, more, all the different kinds of uses that come about. Those things will actually be positive things for the city rather than negative ones. And, it's an excellent thing to have a public discussion about and so part of that, to line that up, let's lay out, if you like the way Mountain View is, relative to Cupertino, there's an opportunity here here are the metrics that underlie why that is, right? It's a similar kind of discussion, if you look at the same kind of discussion around things like around schools or any of these things. There are very deliberate choices that were made. They have consequences. They have consequences over time. They're very difficult to change. Nobody's going to change the housing price situation overnight. And I would even say in 1995 it was expensive to live in Cupertino too, just not relative to what people could make. So I think that, trying to go into a direction where, how do I want to say this? Trying to go down a direction where it isn't clear that that's actually going to lead to something better. I think people just need to kind of have the opportunity to kind of understand that with some clarity.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung. I'll just add a couple things real quick, only to counter the point of view here. There are a lot of things. I think we all want housing affordability. I think we've seen in cities like Vancouver what has happened with really bad zoning laws, a war against single family homes. It's resulted not in cheaper homes, just more expensive homes. And I think there was a guy that came into one of the city council meetings and said, look, in 1970, they told us X, and this would be, if we did Z, X, we'd have more affordable housing. And all we got was more housing that was less affordable. In 1980, they came in and asked us for X. And, if we changed our zoning laws and we get X, Y, and Z, we'll have more housing. And, well, guess what? We got more unaffordable housing. And so there's something that is happening where even if you build more production, the homes still remain out of reach. The second thing is the comparison between these cities is not necessarily fair. If you actually were to count who actually rides on VTA on these transit lines, by the time they get to Cupertino, we're kind of like Coney Island. We're like the last stop, right, on all these transitors. There's very few people on those buses. I mean, there are very, very few people on those buses. I'd rather give people an Uber, reimbursement, and they'd be okay. It'd be cheaper than running the lines, right? But fine, we have some kind of transit in there. We're not even a real transit corridor. Most of our people here are suburban commuters. And the myth that you live near where you work, that's a myth. Your first job, you live near where you work. And how many people switch jobs here? Like we switch jobs every 3 to 5 years in the valley. So yeah, I started out living near transit-based housing in Burlingame, and now I'm driving all the way to the East Bay for work, or going into South Bay because I got a job at Google or somewhere else. So that's a myth, and everybody keeps perpetuating that. And so there are a couple things, but I do want to say that, look, the staff comparison was very useful to understand what other cities are doing. And I think that's very important, right, to get a sense of that. I would have wanted to see, hey, what is Los Gatos doing for a city that's kind of like that versus, Santa Clara or Mountain View, which, are full force going into like high density zones and projects. So it'd be a good kind of comparison. But I'm going to leave it at that and move on so that our next agenda item can continue. But I think Beth wanted to say something. Do we have a hand?
We do have someone with their hand raised who'd like to speak on this item.
Okay, we'll do that quickly and then move on.
Close the public comment already.
Chair's discretion.
She said she couldn't get her hand raised, so.
Right, chair's discretion. We'll go.
Okay.
Who do we have?
Jennifer Griffin?
Oh, okay, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. I tried very hard to get this Zoom signal up. People have had trouble with it in the past in other Zoom sessions that I have attended. So I think we need to make sure that we are very, very careful that we give people time. I have sent several letters to you all. Our power is about ready to go out because the wind is very, very high here in Eastern Cupertino. I'm not sure where you guys are, but I am very, very proud of Heart of the City. I have dedicated a great deal of time in my time living in my area to making sure that Heart of the City is retained. I am very proud of it. It far supersedes anything that San Jose has come up with. I live directly adjacent to the San Jose urban villages because we are immediately at 280 and Stevens Creek. They are going to go up to 180 feet in height at the Safeway Shopping Center by Lawrence. And there is no transition. They are across the street from Santa Clara. There is no transition. Santa Clara allows 30 feet. San Jose, of course, is blowing it up to 180 feet. And they have no transition between adjacent houses. I sat in all the meetings on the San Jose Urban Village development, and they don't listen to anyone, even their own residents. So I will say right now that Cupertino far supersedes anything that San Jose has come up with. Stevens Creek Boulevard right now looks like an urban jungle. They build to the road. They would build on the road if they could. I'm not a big fan of what's been happening to El Camino. It looks like a vertical jungle too. The people don't get it. I've seen stuff that's being built down maybe in Mountain View, Sunnyvale on El Camino. They built the sidewalk. It is unpleasant to drive or even take a bus down El Camino because the thing looks like a concrete jungle prison. It doesn't have to look like that. You can set back 5 feet to be able to put a tree in. But no, the builders don't get it and they want to build onto El Camino. So yeah, I'm sorry. Until I move out of Cupertino, which is no time soon, I far believe that heart of the city is the way to go. And I mean, I don't care at this point. We are lectured from the other cities about how irresponsible Cupertino is. Well, let me tell you, on a hot day, you come back from San Jose into
We got time.
Cupertino, it is 10 degrees cooler because we have trees. Thank you for letting me take time to speak. And I will put my hand up as soon as I can. Thank you.
Okay, we got time. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Any other questions, comments? Okay, Beth, anyone else? Anyone else we met? If you can't raise your hand, send Beth an email. We'll make sure that your voice is heard. So, okay, I'm closing this. We're moving on so we can let staff go to the next item. And we're going to move to agenda item number 4. And that's consider municipal code amendment as part of the transition from LOS, level of service, to VMT, vehicle miles traveled, for determination of transportation impacts under the CEQA Act, which is a change required by Senate Bill SB 743. Recommended action. Oh, good. Sorry.
I'm sorry, did we?
Oh, wait, we skipped number 3.
We have a public hearing item number 3.
I apologize. Let's go to number 3, since our applicant has been waiting. My fault here. Subject number 3, consider the modification to an existing use permit to amend the conditions of approval to allow 100% non-retail commercial uses where only 50% are allowed. Our applicant is Catherine Chen, location 2130 Stevens Creek Boulevard. The recommended action is that the Planning Commission consider the evidence presented, conduct the public hearing, and consider either adopting 1, the draft resolution recommending that the City Council approve the use permit modification, or 2, the alternate draft resolution recommending that the City Council deny the use permit modification. With that, let's move to the staff report. Sorry about that.
Hi, good evening, Planning Commission. Hugh Ghosh, Planning Manager. I'd like to introduce you to John Martier, our Senior Planner, who will be taking this item for Planning Commission tonight.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners and the Cupertino community. I'm John Martier, Senior Planner within the Community Development Department. And let me just get my screen shared. All right, can everyone see? Oh, sorry, not yet. All right, can everyone see that? All good? Okay. Okay, great. This is a use permit modification application M2020-002. For 20130 Stevens Creek Boulevard. And the project title is to consider the modification to an existing use permit to amend the condition of approval to allow 100% non-retail commercial uses where only 50% are allowed. Okay, the project site. So the project site's a mixed-use development that was approved in 2005. As you can see, it's highlighted in red, and the portion that that's commercial is the blue box in the middle right there. You can see the uses around it along Stevens Creek Boulevard are varied. You have office uses, multifamily uses, daycare, commercial offices. Actually, you have daycare on both sides of the street adjacent to it, because within the office building north of that, that's also a daycare center as well. And then you have mixed-use development where the Counter Burger is, just half a block to the east of there. And this is a street level view of the building that is, or the building that's in question for the modification of use permit. Right there, it's a State Farm building, which is approximately 2,400 square feet. So a little bit about the background of this development site. So on March 1st, 2005, City Council approved the use permit 2004-01. Which approved the mixed-use development consisting of approximately 2,400 square feet of retail space and about 23 residential condominiums. The site used to be called I believe the Adobe Terrace Restaurant, and thus was redeveloped into this. One of the conditions that council placed was that for the commercial space, that it would be limited to retail uses only. And I underlined retail because the way that the council had done the condition approval, that retail is different than commercial. In this sense, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple more slides, that retail is essentially the exchange of monies for goods. Go to a restaurant, you order food, you get food in exchange for payment. Clothing store, pay, get clothes in return. Not necessarily a barbershop or a salon or a nail salon or a bank. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. Subsequent to this, new ownership took over of the building, and in 2009, that owner, again, Kathleen Chen at this time as well, City Council approved the modification, M 2009-07, to the use permit. And so what the council decided was to approve the commercial portion to be 50% commercial office, in this case, the State Farm, Miss Kathleen Chen's State Farm office, and 50% retail. Again, so the exchange of goods, that cash goods in return. And as part of that modification, the condition of approval was to state that once the ownership changed hands, that the building would return to 100% retail. So in a sense, this condition of approval had a time limit. So once Ms. Chen sells the building, it reverts back to 100% retail. So this time, the applicant's requesting three things. First, an amended condition of approval to allow the non-retail commercial uses where only 50% is currently allowed. To remove the language which reverts site back to retail when ownership changes. And is subject to limitations of the building to specifically just the CG ordinance and the heart of the city specific plan standards for land uses in commercially zoned areas, not additional conditions of approval that would regulate it, as has been since the building was built. So zoning in the heart of the city commercial standards. So this is where we're going to talk about a little bit, what's retail, what's a zoning ordinance in the heart of the city specifically considered retail, and what is considered commercial offices. So the CG zone in the heart of the city specific plan doesn't have a cap on the amount of businesses in the first three bullets when they're located in a commercial building. So retail business such as restaurants, apparel shops, and variety stores, for example, could be 100% of the building square footage within the heart of the city specific plan area. The same thing goes for commercial offices, so financial institutions such as banks or insurance or travel agencies, even real estate offices that, these are commercial offices that deal directly with the public, where it's like you or I could walk in there and be helped without an appointment to say. Those as well can occupy 100% of the building square footage without limitations or a subsequent use permit or any type of approval, planning approval. And also personal service establishments, beauty shops, massage services, nail salons, etc. Professional offices do have limits. These are law firms, even medical offices as well, where they cannot occupy more than 25% of a shopping center. Heart of the city states a little differently that it goes with a 24% of the frontage along Stevens Creek Boulevard. If you want to go beyond that, you have to get a heart of the city exception. So, in a sense, this building is being treated a little differently than most commercially or similarly zoned buildings, even for mixed use buildings along Stevens Creek, along the Stevens Creek Boulevard corridor or within the heart of the city specific plan. So, as part of the justification for converting this to just be under the jurisdiction of the CG and the heart of the city specific plan, the applicants submitted two letters to help plead her case. One was from a consultant working with Newmark Cornish Carey, and the other one was her attorney. And between the two of those letters, there's 4 reasons why they feel that limiting the uses to 100% retail or even just 50% retail is the disadvantage for the property owner in terms of leasing the spot itself. The first reason is that the retail market is going through significant transformation, and part of that was that this project was approved in 2005. Anyone who's lived in this area knows that in the last 16 years that the retail market has changed, and part of that's because of e-commerce. There's a trend towards downsizing of retail space. You don't see major retailers or even furniture stores wanting that 25, 30,000 square foot spaces within the middle of a city like ours. They are looking for more for the 4 to 10,000 square foot space, as an example. Escalating occupancy costs, which include rent, regulations, increasing minimum wage. Going back to the first point, e-commerce. I mean, this point has been accentuated in the last 10 months during COVID, where people are more and more likely to shop, via Amazon, or more reliant on those types of services. Retailers locate areas where there's a synergy between uses. This is an example where most shopping centers, larger shopping centers, have an anchor tenant, such as a grocery store or major retailer, where folks are attracted to go there and then will cross shop over to those other smaller retail establishments if they need to do errands and whatnot. Or they'll locate similar types of uses or businesses within the same area to get that cross shopping or spillover into those businesses. And one of the things that is said about this spot from the applicant's justification letters is that this doesn't have the benefit of either, meaning that there's no similar uses in that area and there's no anchor tenant to draw in a large amount of retail customers. If you remember looking at the satellite photo, you can see that there's not a lot of similar retail surrounding it that could draw in that customer base. Limited parking. The building does have rights to 10 parking spaces, and for uses such as restaurants, although this is code compliant, the amount of parking for restaurants, they would require probably a lot more parking, particularly when 3 of those 10 parking spaces are hidden underground and potentially shared with a lot of the residential uses, and it's not even guaranteed that those 3 spaces wouldn't be used by some of the neighboring or the condominium residents or their guests. And retailers look for convenient, easy access to a store. The example of that was part of the submission by the applicant's consultant was that this is a mid-block retail building. There's no left turning lane that goes into it from the westbound direction of Stevens Creek Boulevard. If someone going westbound would like to go to that or utilize those shops, they'd have to go all the way to the next street over, make a U-turn, and come back and whatnot. So again, there's no easy way in, no easy way out of this commercial area. So staff analysis. The way staff sees that limiting uses to retail only for 50% of the building eliminates potential commercial tenants, which would otherwise be in conformance with the heart of the city specific plan. So if this was allowed 100% commercial uses, it would still be in conformance with the heart of the city specific plan and the zoning ordinance, much like most of the retail buildings and developments, even the mixed use ones along the Stevens Creek Boulevard corridor, excuse me. However, the general plan does state that, particularly within this part of Stevens Creek Boulevard, that developments should at least encourage uses that generate city revenue, and also states that ground floor buildings along the street should be activated with pedestrian-oriented active uses, including retail, restaurants, entries, etc. And many of the, particularly the commercial office uses that would be allowed by right, don't necessarily fit that mold of pedestrian-oriented active uses, such as a real estate office or even a hair salon to a certain extent. So this project, this modification would be exempt from CEQA under section 15301 as an existing facility consisting of operating, repair, maintenance, permitting, leasing, license, or minor alteration to existing public or private structures, facilities, mechanical equipment, or topographical features involving negligible or no expansion of existing or former use. There is one text revision to the draft resolution for recommending approval to the council, and is the first condition of approval. It states the Cupertino Municipal Code section 1956 was general commercial CG zoning district, when in actuality is 19.60. So I just want to make that clarification before the commission becomes a recommendation. And I apologize for that. So the recommendation, as stated earlier, is that the Planning Commission consider the evidence presented, conduct a public hearing, consider either adopting the draft resolution recommending that the City Council approve the use permit modification, or the alternate draft resolution recommending that the City Council deny the use permit modification. Next steps is that the City Council hearing is on February 16th to consider the Planning Commission recommendation and to decide whether the modification can be supported. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, John. Any questions from the commissioners before we bring the app? Oh, wait, does the applicant go first, or we do questions? I can make sure in terms of the process.
Usually applicant.
Presents next.
Well, if anyone has questions of John, now would be the time. Yeah. And next.
Yeah, let's do John's questions first, and then have the applicant make any kind of presentation as well. Okay, not hearing anything from the commissioners, we will go to the applicant. Sanjeev.
Yeah,
Commissioner Kapil, go ahead.
Yeah, the picture I was shown to you was a house, and the front you had a commercial office. Right? So does this proposal basically account for the residents who are living in the same complex? Any objections for it?
No.
Oh, John, you're breaking up massively. You may want to come back in. So, yes, you're Darth Vadering.
How about now?
Why don't you log back in, and I will buy some time. How about that?
If Commissioner Capel, if you wouldn't mind repeating your question, I can attempt to.
Yeah, I was just pointing out that this is a mixed-use property, and that the proposal put forward, does it account for any feedback from the residents who are also located onto the same property? Are there any objections to it, or any kind of whether they have been polled for their opinion about it? That's all I was asking.
Okay.
Can you hear me better now?
John, you sound great. So go ahead.
Oh,
do you want to go? Or?
I'll let John answer, and I'll summarize. John, Commissioner Capel is asking whether there are any objections from the residents on the property or any comments at all.
I haven't received any at all.
And they have been noticed.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Let's go to the applicant then, if there's no more questions. And let's bring Catherine Chen if she's got anything she'd like to say.
I was told I cannot show my video. Somebody have to unlock me. So, okay, it's okay. This is Catherine Chen.
Let me ask to start your video. You should be able to come in now. So.
Okay, yeah. Hi,
Welcome.
Commissioner. This, okay, let me take this way. Yeah, let me give a little bit background. Like Commissioner Capel asked, any resident have any complaint? There is none. The reason in the past, this unit, this space being vacant for 5 years. But in this 5-year period, I do have 2 interest party. One is Pizza Hut. The residents doesn't like a Pizza Hut come in. And secondly, I have an eyeglass shop. But the problem is, as John said, we have a 23 unit, or the parking space downstairs. I total have 10. But think about UPS, Amazon, or repair truck. They'll park on my space. How can I provide to another business and have enough parking space? That's the, okay, the resident doesn't want any retail, have the smell, they don't like that kind of thing. So that's why I do not have enough parking space. I have a lot, I have tea shop, I have exercise room, they all interest, but eventually I say you have to talk to the city building department, say, if you involve selling the stuff, you collect the sales tax, then you can come in. And they will always take what was told no. And the eyeglass shop does going to get the permit, tenant improvement application. But later on, they found out the parking is not enough for them. So that's why they'll back out. I have a Pizza Hut and the eyeglass shop all back out. That's I try. Can I share a little bit something? I put ad, I don't, okay, I have to share the screen. I put the ad on the on the LoopNet CoStar for the commercial property listing. I did that, and I also do it in front of in my office. If I can do the just one thing. Okay, sorry, not this one. Okay, here. I have to put for lease sign in front of my unit. Everybody call me, I will tell them, you have to be, I have to talk with the city, that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm just stopped. I don't think you can see it, but I'm just saying I tried for the past 5 years. Well, in the past 5 years, I've been doing for nothing. I don't have rental income. City doesn't have any income either. So let me go back. The reason I start my state front agency in 2001 and the rental space on the Anza Boulevard. After 8 years, every year base rent, the triple net go up each year. So on my 9th year, it's happened to have this building come out. I say, why not? I refinanced my house, took out the equity and put the down payment for this building just for my own use. And then maybe a little hair from the rental income to offset my mortgage payment. But there is because not enough space. If there's space, I have no problem fulfill the City of Cupertino requirement, but I don't have enough space. I talk about UPS, repair, the plumber, all those things, parking here. I cannot tell them they cannot park there, but they took the space. So I'm just saying, I hope Commissioner, you guys can understand the past 5 years, I lost more than 200,000. So not because I want to, against your wishes, city's wishes, to want to modification of the rule. Not at all. I'm just saying, if I rent it to some tenant and city gets some, at least the license fee or whatever, have a little bit income. The past 5 years, nothing, and it's dark. Doesn't look good for the city either. So that's the main reason. And last year, 2020 pandemic is worse. So I say, I hope Commissioner can grant my request. So I'm not killed financially. So this is, hopefully this is my request. If you have any question, I can answer for you.
Commissioners, do you have any question for the applicant?
Sure, I have
Commissioner
Fong. Ms. Chen, if you were
Yes.
if we were to grant this exception, what kinds of tenants do you think would be the most likely kinds of people you'd hope to get in the other half of your office space?
I'm looking at for those business, the commercial office, the by appointment only. So you are not like a restaurant, everybody stop by anytime they want. This is just by appointment only. My state farm agency, we by appointment only. So we can arrange the parking space, will not have problem. So that's why retail is not fit in this standalone building. So that's why the attorney office, title company, or or the real estate company. So that kind of thing. At least they're by appointment, they come to you. So hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Fong.
Any other questions from other commissioners here? I have a question, General, for staff as well. Ms. Chen, thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony. Just a question for staff. What type of commercial uses generate tax income? So just so that we know.
Off sales taxes, if there's an exchange of goods. And again, that kind of goes back to the thinking of council back in 2005 was, they saw this restaurant that was generating sales tax be redeveloped. So they wanted to maintain some type of sales tax income for the city in exchange for it. And again, that's a condition of approval that goes above and beyond the regulations for the the CG zone in the heart of the city.
But John, just a general question. I mean, like,
Sure.
would a title company generate tax revenue? I think the answer is no, right?
Probably not. No.
Okay. Would a Pizza Hut would definitely generate revenue, right? Okay. Just to get the wide range. Okay. So would a after school tutoring program generate tax revenue?
No. But that's
Would a
but that's
daycare?
not. No, would not at all.
Okay.
Probably.
Just so that people have the wide range. Would attorney's office generate revenue for the city?
No.
Okay.
What I would add, though, if I could add on to your Chair Wang, is that so for example, a hair salon could generate sales tax revenue if they sell product in the store, which would currently not be allowed under the current use permit, hair salon. So even though it's a sales tax generating use, it's considered a personal service, which is not allowed under the current use permit conditions of approval. So that's part of what I believe the applicant is trying to do is increase the breadth of uses that are within the commercial office and personal services specifically for that space. Because I believe I'm trying to think. 1,200 square feet is actually probably a decent sized square footage for a personal service salon or a hair or nail salon or something similar. So
Repair service would be okay, right?
repair service, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Right. Repair service, personal services, that kind of area. All right. No, I'm just looking. I just remember looking at the code 1960-030, and that was where a lot of this was. So we're trying to expand the use beyond just the retail limitations of 1960-0300.
Correct.
So
Correct.
okay, got it. Okay. Any other questions to staff, commissioners? Okay. All right. I guess any deliberation among the commissioners? And
Are there no
Beth,
comments?
you've got something?
Oral
This is a good
communication.
Public comments.
time for
We need public
comment.
comments. Let's get some public comments first. Sorry.
I think I saw there was an email that had come in, but
There were 2 emails and public comments. If you had a public comment, please raise your hand. I see Jennifer Griffin.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is so windy. My power may go out. I had sent the comments for number 3 and number 4 in case we signed off. I won't say that. Yes, I remember back in the day when the Adobe restaurant was there, and I remember when this item came up before the city council, and that was such a difficult piece of property. It had it's almost like a flag lot. It goes deep
back. The restaurant was in the back, and there was a very narrow driveway. So at the time, I believe it was the something brothers, somebody brothers built it. And they had the housing in the back, and then there was the little bit of retail in the front. And I completely understand how difficult it is to try to have this type of retail. I do think it's important that we try to maintain as much retail along Stevens Creek Boulevard as possible. And in this situation, I think you all described essentially when retail, like what is commercial versus retail, what is office space.
I think in this situation, I just had a couple of comments. I think that for ongoing, I believe that they should keep retail as the primary zoning or whatever you call it for this property. I know it's unique, but then have exceptions so that in this situation, you all were able to have the State Farm office there, which I believe is commercial. And then uh, maybe somebody that was coming in that was going to try to use the other space could just come back to the city. I think this is what you all said they did, and just ask if they could have commercial there or office. The other thing is down the road, could this it is the are the two pieces of space, would they be able to be combined into one larger area to have a large retail presence? And I remember that the parking was difficult to work out at the time because this was what 15 years ago. But maybe they could reallocate some of the parking if the use of the space changed. But is this flexible enough to make it one large retail property out of it, et cetera, et cetera? Those are my comments. I just think that I understand. I have great sympathy for the owner. This was a very difficult building project, but I do think we need to try to maintain retail as much as possible in Stevens Creek Boulevard, but have considerations to have special permits such as the commercial or professional office space. Even like having a sewing shop there where people bring in things to drop
We're out
off.
of time, Jennifer.
Anything else. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. We have another hand raised. I believe we've got, is that Rick Kitson from the chamber?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, and let's get you on
Great.
video as well.
Well, thank you for having me. I simply wanted to weigh in. I believe the commission has a letter from the Chamber of Commerce. In spite of the planning goals for this space, I think the commission has seen that you have an applicant that has worked hard to make this space work, and unfortunately it doesn't. And compounded by long-term changes in the retail market where small retail is at an increasing disadvantage, I think the commission is in a great place to make the space economically viable. And I think that would be an overarching priority and goal for the community and for the commission, and add to the economic health and welfare of our community. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Rick. Thanks for being here. And all right, any other people? Anything written, anything sent? Beth?
No, we don't have any other comments. No other hand raised at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, that closes the public input aspect of it. Let's go to the commissioners. Oh, Seth.
Chair, yeah, we typically give the applicant a chance to respond if they would like to. I don't know if they want to here, but.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's do that as well. So.
Yes, Commissioner, I would really like to have the modification because retail really only have nice space, not enough space. Even with she said combined with to one unit, it's still not enough space. So you are just struggling to where to park. Less parking, and then people, the business, they are smart business people, they were not coming. I say I have a lot. I have the optical shop, they all back out. After they think it through, just say not enough space, even for their own employee, let alone talk about the customer. So it's really, it's not healthy for the parking space. How can the business survive? So that's the only thing. I just, hopefully you can grant me for the modification. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chen. Okay. Commissioners, let's deliberate. Commissioner Fung.
Sure, I'll speak to this a little bit. So that there's a, I actually remember I attended a lot of council meetings probably back in that period at the time when the previous modification was granted. There was a lot of concern at that time in Cupertino that stores that previously were retail stores were turning into, there were actually a lot of tutoring places, a lot of martial arts school, and this was, and I think restaurants were just starting to become a factor, although not as much as the others. And this was something that they were very, very strict on trying to impose, to at least we strongly encourage the owners to try to make an effort, not to just have another tutoring place because of that loss of sales tax dollars. There certainly has been many, many, many changes in demand over those years. I mean, the 15 years since this was granted. This particular case is very, very well documented about the challenges that, very specific documentation that there's been a good faith effort on the part of the owner to really try to do something here. And I think that the real, there's an exclamation point on this particular application because of the long period of vacancy. Having a space that you're the owner of, the landlord of, that's unoccupied for years is really, the applicant is much more patient than I would be. I think that, so I guess I'll step back and I'll say, maybe it's a continuation of the previous point in some respects. This is being governed by the Heart of the City plan. There were many good intentions at the time when it was created. There were good intentions at the time when it was modified and updated, 15 years ago or 13 years ago. The problem is it's, I think, very, very, it's very, very obsolete. We actually have seen this before. One of my first hearings, 4 years ago now, one of my first hearings on the Planning Commission was when the new owner of Scandinavian Designs had come forward with a plan looking to change out of being all furniture store. I mean, he's actually got a very large building. And that was something that was not possible because of a number of restrictions and requirements that date back to, 2000. We have a lot of discussions here about objective criteria. So it's an interesting one because in this particular case, the Heart of the City is extremely objective about the amount of space that needs to be dedicated to certain uses, to retail use, on properties that face onto Stevens Creek Boulevard. So I don't know. We often don't have really, really strict objective criteria. This one is one of those cases. So there are a lot of people who want to treat the specific plan, the general plan here, as being kind of gospel, inflexible. Under those, in that kind of light, this exception should not be granted. But, as I've said, too much now over the last year, Heart of the City in particular is something where, because these standards date back to a time which really is not all that applicable to now. I think that you want to take a look at this case in terms of the very clear justifications that were offered, the change in the business environment, a really, really huge effort to try to conform to those requirements, and very little chance that that's going to change in the future. I also will cite, not as a justification, I'll also cite that this applicant has a very long-term and positive standing in the Cupertino local business community. That's not a reason to give somebody an exception, but it is notable that I think that in terms of her support of business in the city and her willingness to kind of go down these various avenues to try to make a business of this, that's notable as well. So I would just say that this is kind of another example of a place where some of the old regulations we have stand in the way and kind of create a negative, what is something that is overall negative for the city. And I would actually say, I would actually point out that those kind of considerations, those are the same kind of things that apply to a Scandinavian Design again, in this particular case, the owner was just trying to transition out of, being a furniture store, or having it all be a furniture store. He was even going to continue to do that. And that even extends to something like Valco, where you can see many owners over many, many years, decades, try to make a viable business of it and were not able to. So I think that I would just hope that that when those cases come forward, that the overall situation be considered in terms of whether to grant the exception or not. In my case, in looking at this, I support the exception, and hope that this can lead to I think that it'll be positive for not only for the owner, but positive for the city as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung. Any comments from Commissioner Takahashi?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think the intent obviously has always been to foster and develop retail as defined by John for the city, and that's why these requirements were established. The problems and the limitations that have been outlined by the applicant, I think, really demonstrate a situation where the viability of retail in that space is questionable at best, right? Even if a tenant were found, it's probably a fair chance that business would fail, given the constraints associated with parking, and it's not exactly highly visible from the street. It's not connected to other elements of retail. People aren't going to walk there. And so, I think it's a testament to the fact that we are here discussing this exception. So there is a method to assess a reasonable request to an exception when, as well as the demonstration of the applicant to, in good faith, try to meet the requirement over multiple years at an expense. And so, given all of those factors, to me, I also would support this exception, primarily because I just don't see retail ever being successful there. And so you just have a revolving, it'd be either vacant or you'd have somebody come, they would most likely fail, vacant, right? And it's just kind of a cycle that is not economically acceptable for the owner. So that's where I stand. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Takahashi. Commissioner Kapil, what are your comments?
I think I support this exception in the sense that as long as in this mixed-use property, the resident has been notified about the change and the proposal, and there is no, as far as I know, that right now the vacant space is not generating any tax dollars anyways. So whether non-commercial use, non-retail commercial use, like attorney's office or kind of a similar business, doesn't generate any dollar, it doesn't change the current situation as such. So from that perspective, I don't see it negative, although it doesn't have any positive as well. So from the retail, I understand that the parking constraint and the site property it is. Given all those highlighted constraints, it is okay to adopt this exception because of the unique situation here. That's my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Kapil. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to add something. I might come to a different line of thinking than Commissioner Fung. I'll probably come to the same conclusion, but I'm going to say, look, the root cause here is bad mixed-use zoning. Not enough parking is the issue here. I mean, like, you're going to stick, we keep talking about, oh, it's retail's a problem, but the reality is that parking is still essential. So every time we come up into this conversation about, oh, we should cut down number of parking spaces, people are just going to take Uber. That's not our city. That is not our city. We need to make sure our small businesses are able to succeed. And sometimes that means having enough parking. And so when we create these mixed retail environments where there's no parking, right? Come on, I drive. I mean, maybe I'll bike there. Maybe it's walkable to a certain extent, but parking is essential. So it's kind of ridiculous that we actually put this stuff in there without even thinking about it. So we also need more retail scenarios. And this should be a lesson on why we need to not wage a war on the automobile and think about what type of density makes sense for a community. That being said, look, the applicant has tried. I have a lot of sympathy for her. It's an important small business in our area, and I'm also supporting the exemption. But I just want to make sure I'm clear, as my rationale is very different than what was being said earlier. Okay, anybody have a motion?
Well, I'm gonna.
You want to respond? You want to rebuttal? Okay, go for it.
So first of all, I would have been disappointed if you didn't hit the parking thing. I would actually just come back and say, when we create a requirement for high degrees of parking, for a lot of parking, that actually becomes something that makes businesses not viable. You don't have retail because of the high amount of parking that's required. I think there was actually Commissioner Capil asked a very interesting question about that Home Depot is actually in San Jose, but it does seem like a Home Depot or a Target is wasting a lot of space. The problem is that if you had to build a parking structure and those parking spaces cost twice as much, or if you had to build underground and it costs 3 times as much, you wouldn't have that business. So, yeah, I certainly take the point. I understand. I think that whether you want to make this, if the resolution, if the way that you had to go here was that the heart of the city needed to have a higher parking requirement for retail, or a higher parking requirement, then I think that you would actually have a negative effect overall on what happens here. Not to say that there's not a negative effect from, businesses that can't, what was the name of that? The bubble tea place, it was kind of crazy. Any of those places, impossible to park, that kind of thing.
Like Happy Lemon, like no one can park there, but everyone parks at the at that hotel by accident. Yeah. That one, okay. No. So appreciate your comments, Commissioner Fung. Anybody else? Anyone want to entertain a motion? I think we're going to come to the same conclusion. We're not here to debate heart of the city, but. Well, I'll make a motion then. I'll make a motion that we take the draft resolution recommending that the City Council approve the use permit modification. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Can we include the CEQA exemption language in your motion?
And including a friendly amendment, including the CEQA exemption to this as well.
Oh, and do we need to do anything for that? There was an adjustment. Was that that wasn't the CEQA?
No, that wasn't. But I think just to be clear what we're doing, would someone making the motion just use the draft motion language that that you're proposing be adopted here?
Yeah, let me pull it up. Sorry, I thought I had it, and I think.
And John, is that I guess echoing Commissioner Fung, is that does that correction appear in the resolution language?
I haven't made the correction yet in the draft resolution. It's within the conditions.
It's just one. It was just one little number, but.
Yeah, but he's saying it's within the conditions of approval, though, so it's not in the.
It's not in there.
It's not in the language that rather the two parts of the resolution. But I think what we should do is ensure that it's include in your motion that you're adopting a change that John is going to make. Does that sound fair, John?
Yes.
Okay. So my motion. Okay. The motion is determined that the project is exempt from CEQA, pursuant to CEQA guidelines, and to approve the application for a modification to a use permit as set forth in the attached draft resolution, and to consider and include the correct section that we're trying to consider as per Jean Marté. Is there a second?
Second that. Yeah, I'll second that because it's a lot easier than actually making the resolution.
Fine. Okay. Deliberation. Anyone on the team? Anyone else have a different conversation points? Okay. With that, let's do a roll. Let's do a vote. Beth?
Thank you. Commissioner Capil?
Yeah, aye.
Takahashi,
Aye.
Commissioner Fung,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wong.
Aye.
Motion carries 401 with Sexina absent.
Okay. Congratulations, Ms. Jen. Let's move on to the next item. Actually, I'm checking in with everybody. Does anybody need a bio break? I know we've been going hard for the last 2 hours or more. So if you want, would you guys be open to a 5-minute break to come back, get some water and bio? Okay, let's come back here at 9:05 for those listening in. We'll be on item number 4, and we'll see you here at actually 9:06. So, all right,